Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am very privileged to start this event, and I'm twice privileged because I would like to dedicate this event to the memory of Vartan Gregorian. Usually, a historian has his views on the past, because a historian is someone who examines the past. Vartan Gregorian was a unique example, one of the unique examples of being a historian who always had his views on the future. He was always thinking about the future. He was one to establish and fund and help to operate educational institutions, educational programs. And he also was a visionary. To be a visionary, you have to think about future and have your views on the future. He was really, and he was one of the biggest visionaries of our time. I am very proud to dedicate this event to him.
Yes, and to echo that, I was very privileged to know Vartan Gregorian. He supported all of our work, and it's very good to remember him fondly this evening in Yerevan.
Now, it's a second privilege because we with Tom are long-time friends. We are friends for decades. And honestly, I didn't know until recently that Tom is so very interested in the Russian poetry, specifically in the poetry of the Silver Age, Серебряный век, that he managed to translate for me. Mandelstam is one of Russian authors who is the most difficult to be translated into any other language. Because Mandelstam feels the words. He plays with words and sounds, and he's very delicate in playing with words and sounds. So, Tom, there are two questions, one after another. One is, what is Tristia and why Tristia? So it's already two questions, but there will be a second one coming.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm also going to say a few words of introduction. Good evening, Yerevan. Great to see friends. I hope you can hear me. I can't see all of you. We'll do this evening in English, но если кто-нибудь хочет задавать вопрос на русском, я отвечу на русском. Otherwise, we will do this in English.
I'm sure if someone wants to ask a question in Armenian, Tom will answer in English, but we will understand the question.
Okay.
That's okay.
Let me just say a few words, because before you say what is Mandelstam, Tristia, we have to say what is Osip Mandelstam, because I think he's the greatest Russian poet of the 20th century, but I think he's particularly beloved in Armenia. I'm glad to say, thanks to his wonderful writings on Armenia. But he's also, I think, not fully understood, and he goes in and out of fashion. I think in Russia at the moment he's a bit out of fashion, but that's, I think, more of a reflection on Russia than on Mandelstam. And let me just say three contradictions about Mandelstam, which I think are important before we move to Tristia. One, that unfortunately, when Mandelstam's name is introduced, most people talk about his death at the hands of the Stalinist system in 1938. And for me, he is a poet of life, and I hope we'll get some of these life-affirming poems this evening. So that's one contradiction, although Tristia is also a collection of death. It begins with a funeral and ends with a requiem. So Mandelstam sees the cycle of life and death as being important. Secondly, he's a modernist poet. We've been, some of us on this summer school with Tom Kitson have been studying, had an evening talking about Ilyast. a modernist poet, and this concept of zaum, sometimes it's nonsense or absurd, you sometimes feel in Mandelstam, but he's also a classicist at the same time. He observes all the classical meters and admires the classical poets. Someone described his poetry as, in Russian, as classический zaum. The third contradiction, I guess, and here sitting in Yerevan, this is relevant. He's a poet, a Jewish poet, born in what's now Lithuania and lived in St. Petersburg, but he loved the Christian South. He loved the Caucasus, the Black Sea, the Greek world. So there's another contradiction for you about Osip Mandelstam. What is Tristia? Tristia is his second collection of poems. The references to Ovid on the Black Sea and his exile. That is the geography mainly of the collection. It is Ukraine, it is Crimea, it's sometimes Georgia, but it is the Hellenic world, more or less, and it is the underworld, it is Orpheus, it is Persephone, it is all those figures. And it is also, I think, a requiem for the loss of a culture in the middle of revolution. So it's a collection written between 1916 and 1921, 5 years in which the whole world, everywhere, but particularly in the Russian Empire, was turned upside down. A time of conflict, time of exile which Mandelstam in the end refused. And when Mandelstam was asked once to define what is Acmeism, his school of poetry, he described it as toska po mirovой kultuре, nostalgia for world culture.
Tom, and how did it happen that you decided to translate Mandelstam? Because we know you as a researcher, as an analyst who is working in a completely different sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I moved on to these more prosaic subjects like politics, conflict, European Union and South Caucasus, I was a philolog. I studied Russian literature in Oxford, also Greek literature, which is perhaps relevant for Mandelstam. And at one point, I thought I could make a career in literature, but I realized then at some point, one, that it didn't pay, and two, that a lot was going on in the world that I needed to engage with. And so literature became my hobby rather than my profession. But I loved reading Mandelstam when I was at Oxford. This was in the mid to late 80s. And with the arrogance of youth, I decided no one has translated the complete collection of Tristia. Mandelstam thought that a book of poems has its own identity, its own integrity, tselnost, that the poems talk to one another, that a book of poems that you can pick up like this in one volume has an identity. And Mandelstam had been translated mainly in selected poems, a poem here, a poem there. I decided someone should translate Tristia, and why not me? So I started this project in 1988, and I soon discovered it was completely impossible. I translated 5 or 10 poems, and then I picked it up and put it down. Years passed. I wrote other books that you may have read about conflict and Karabakh and Chechnya and so on. But occasionally I would pick up this, and then during lockdown I suddenly realized, I looked at the calendar and I saw 2022 will be the centenary of Tristia. Surely I have now the space and the time to finish this project. Well, I didn't quite finish it. The collection actually was first published in 2023, the 101st anniversary, but still, it was the motivation to finish this collection. I found a very good publisher, ARC. I think they did a beautiful job. This is, by the way, from production of Fedra in Moscow in 1922, the tire of production, and Fedra is the first poem, so this seemed a good cover image for the collection. So that's is the story. And of course, why it took me so long is because I set myself very, very high standards. I said, I will try to preserve the meter as much as possible, razmir, that's very important to Mandelstam. Sometimes I will even try to preserve the rhyme, although I didn't always. And that, of course, became impossible. And then some of the poems I simply didn't understand. You need to read all these good scholars of Mandelstam to understand it. So actually it took me 35 years to complete this, 34 years to complete this.
Well, yes, but 34 years, I believe it's very good for a project because you are maturing. You are starting to see things differently and maybe better and maybe understand them deeper than you did when, in the younger years. Now, when you are translating, you are digging much deeper into the text and meanings, rather than just reading it. I believe there were a lot of very interesting findings on your way during this translation. Can you tell us about one or two? Because, it's a result of a very deep reading into the text, going deeply into that. Please.
Well, maybe the answer to that would be to read a poem first, and then we can discuss the findings in the poem. So maybe we should I suggest that we read number 13 in the poem. Zолотистого меда струя из бутылки текла. Mark, you can read it in Russian, and then I will read it in English. Let me just begin by saying that it's a 15-syllable meter. I think it's anapistic pentameter. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. And it's the line goes on much longer than you would expect in a poem. So it's already the meter conveys this rather You're by the coast of the Black Sea. You're in contemporary 1917 Crimea, but you're also immediately slipping back into ancient Crimea, which is Tauris, Tavrida, which is Tauris in ancient Greek. Also, Catherine the Great also liked to call it Tauris. So let's maybe read that poem, and then we can discuss a bit what it means.
We agreed with Tom that I'll be reading the poems in Russian, and he then will be reading them in English. So, золотистого меда струя из бутылки текла, так тягуче и долго, что молвить хозяйка успела. Здесь, в печальной Тавриде, куда нас судьба занесла, мы совсем не скучаем, и через плечо поглядела. Всюду Бахуса службы, как будто на свете одни сторожа и собаки. Идешь, никого не заметишь, как тяжелые бочки спокойные катятся дни. Далеко в шалаше голоса, не поймешь, не ответишь. После чаю мы вышли в огромный коричневый сад. Как ресницы на окнах опущены темные шторы. Мимо белых колонн мы пошли посмотреть виноград, где воздушным стеклом обливаются сонные горы. Я сказал, виноград, как старинная битва, живет, где курчавые всадники бьются в кудрявом порядке, в каменистой Тавриде наука Эллады, и вот золотых десятин благородные ржавые грядки. Ну а в комнате белой, как прялка, стоит тишина. Пахнет уксусом, краской и свежим вином из подвала. Помнишь, в греческом доме любимая всеми жена, не Елена, другая, как долго она вышивала. Золотое руно, где же ты, золотое руно? Всю дорогу шумели морские тяжелые волны, и, покинув корабль, натрудивший в морях полотно, Одиссей возвратился пространством и временем полный.
As it took such an age for the honey's long, thick, golden thread to ooze from the bottle, our hostess could lazily tell us, here in sorrowful Tauris, where we have been stranded by fate, we are not at all bored, and she cast a glance over her shoulder. After Bacchus called all to the harvest, you feel quite alone in a world with just watchmen and dogs. As you walk, you see no one. Days roll onwards like barrels. They are heavy and peaceful and slow. Faint voices call out far away, you don't catch them or answer. After tea, we walked into the garden so brown and immense. They had lowered dark blinds that like eyelashes covered the windows. We progressed past a white colonnade to admire the vines. Shining crystals of air were glazing the languorous hillsides. These vines are a battle, I said. They are ancient, alive, and their tousled-haired horsemen are fighting in leafy formations. In the boulders of Taurus, the science of Hellas still thrives. Here noble and rust-patterned borders divide golden acres. Like a spinning wheel, silence is standing inside the white room. Smells of vinegar paint and young wine rise up out of the cellar. You remember the woman they loved inside the Greek's home? Not Helen, the other. How long did she wait and embroider? Golden fleece, oh, where are you? Where are you, our lost golden fleece? Heavy sea waves were thundering loudly throughout the whole passage, and forsaking the ship that exhausted its sail in the seas, in the end old Odysseus returned, filled with time and great spaces. So I love this poem. Mandelstam was staying in a place called Koktebel on the southern Crimean coast. And the hostess in the second line was a woman called Vera Stravinsky. The hosts were Sergei Sudeikin, who was a famous artist and theater designer, and Vera, his wife. Their story is interesting because they then fled from Crimea to Georgia and on to Paris. And in Georgia, they got to know the poet Ilyas, who Tom Kitson is studying. And Ilyas actually wrote the poems on a dress, a sleeve of a dress in Paris, which I think Sonia Delaunay designed. And this avant-garde dress with a surrealist poem written on it was for Vera Stravinsky. Then in Paris, she actually abandoned her husband Sudeikin, and she went off with Igor Stravinsky, and she became Mrs. Stravinsky. So that's also Vera Stravinsky is the same person. But I think this poem sort of it's a mixture of the modern and ancient worlds. Всюду Баха со службы. People couldn't understand what was going on until I read a study by two Ukrainian scholars, which I dig this out, which explains that that in the summertime, all the young men were working the vineyards. No, the towns and beaches were empty because they were all working hard in the vineyards, which is why I had to translate that as after Bacchus called all to the harvest.
They're just drinking, Tom. They're just drunkards.
Well, I'm
No. It's not as straightforward as that.
Well, I'm sure they are working, and I'm sure they're also drinking. Bacchus со службы is work, and then when you've finished your work, you can drink as well. It's both, I'm sure.
It's let me add a couple of words. Drinking starts somewhere in early November when the new wine comes.
Good point. Yes. Okay.
Yes, and before that, you have to work to have that wine happen.
Says it smells from the cellar, so there was a wine already.
Yeah, that was.
Of course, of course, it has to be.
There's a lot, and interesting. What was the myod? In the first line, is it honey or is it mead? Is it alcoholic? I don't think anyone's got a complete answer to that. Of course, lots of classicist poets were very sniffy about this poem because they said that Helen did not embroider.
Of course, Penelope did.
It was. I mean, the one не Елена, другая как долго.
Не Елена,
but she didn't vышивала. She didn't embroider. But she did. But she didn't. She actually spun. She didn't.
She embellished all the time.
She was embroidering in daytime and then...
No, but she wasn't embroidering. She was actually spinning. Anyway, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
It's a poem. It's a poem. So I don't. Anyway, and of course the last line is wonderful about Odysseus' return full of time and space. I had to extend that a little in English to get the 15 syllables in.
And you know, there is one element of this poem that even now, when we are listening to it and listening to the translation, we are starting to argue with each other about the meanings, which gives us also, I believe, a very important sniff of Mandelstam's poetry, because his verses are always full of different meanings. He puts a lot of meanings into one verse, and then how are you translating exactly? Мед, золотистый мед. Is it honey? Is it wine?
Is it both?
Is it both?
So, and let me just say, we can possibly read the poem Siostry, but he uses the metaphor of a plow. So in his essay, The Word and Culture, he says, poetry is a plow that turns up time, such that the deepest strata of time, its black earth, emerged to the surface. And so then he also says, we often hear, this is good, but it belongs to yesterday. I answer by saying, today has not yet been born. I want Ovid, Pushkin, and Catullus to live again. I'm not satisfied with the historic Ovid, Pushkin, Catullus. I think what he means here is that poetry is a plow that and he's digging up all the ancient poets and making them contemporary again. So it's all these different layers of meaning. Also, a lot of these poems are in the first person. They are I, they're ya. And it's obviously, at one level, it's Mandelstam, but then he's also impersonating, he's ventriloquizing. In the title poem, Tristia, he's being Ovid, and yet he's also being Mandelstam. So there's layers of meaning here.
And we can also say that it somehow foresees the appearance of postmodernist culture, where you are using a literary work or a person in the past to reincarnate what has been done and have it again in a form of creative reflection. I mean, shall we go?
Should we do
just before we go on, I want to say a couple of sentences to put the things into context, and I believe it will be needed for the fellows. Koktebel in early 20th century was a place for the Russian creative intelligentsia to gather around in summers and also parts of autumn. There was the house of well-known poet and painter Maximilian Voloshin, a big house which was hosting basically everybody that could find a place. And of course, there were houses of other artists and actors and poets surrounding him. And Voloshin was the center of the whole company. He was always known as the one who inspires the creative output of these people. Now we're going forward, and this is my suggestion, Tom, number 20.
Oh, okay. I was going to. Okay. Okay. This is definitely Zaum. Mandelstam has a fever in 1918, and he dedicates this poem to Anna Akhmatova.
Что поют часы кузнечик? Лихорадка шелестит, и шуршит сухая печка. Это красный шелк горит. Что зубами мыши точат, жизни тоненькое дно? Это ласточка и дочка отвязала мой челнок. Что на крыше дождь бормочет? Это черный шелк горит. Но черемуха услышит и на дне морском прости. Потому что смерть невинна, и ничем нельзя помочь, что в горячке соловьиной сердце теплое еще.
Hear what the fever whispers and the cicada clock trills. The dry stove crackles. Listen, a fire of burning red silk. The mice's delicate molars gnaw the flimsy base of life. See the swallow and her daughter cut my little boat adrift. On the roof the rain is grumbling. It is black silk on fire. My cherry will hear, forgive me, even on the ocean floor. Death is a blameless endeavour. There's no help. Admit defeat. Even in nightingale fever, you can hear the warm heart beat.
Nightingale fever, Tom, that's fantastic for me.
So just a little more. I mean, this is really the most absurdist poem but he, Akhmatova actually wrote about this poem. She said that she had a fever and they sat in front of the fire, which maybe the krasny shulk, that she imagined that the fire was a red silk. But the rest of it, I mean, it's really, we're really.
Then it comes the black silk
Yes,
on
exactly.
the roof.
Yeah.
And that, I know they probably don't have anything in common, but the famous film Color of Pomegranate, one of the most famous scenes in that film is how the princess is showing embroidery, covering part of her face. And first it's white, then comes red, and then comes black.
Maybe we should do them because I've referenced already Сёстры тяжесть и нежность number 27.
Tom, can I ask a question about the 20th?
Yeah. Please.
Shakespeare, critic, there is one error which was reflecting in English translation actually. В оригинале «но черемуха услышит и на дне морском простит». It's not a request for forgiveness. Eventually, Mandelstam, it is forgiven already. So,
Well, I mean,
you should check.
well, of course, there are some different разные чтения these.
Нет, есть академическое, это просто это меняет смысл.
Well, sure, for sure.
В принципе, это не умаляет зрелищности твоего
No,
В оригинале это очень важно. Мандельштам, в принципе, не просит никогда ничего, он не смеет ничего просить. Исключает возможность, что он чего-то просит. Он слишком смиренен, слишком велик для этого.
Okay.
Все уже прощено. Это очень важный момент. Это не смысловое, это метафизическое значение. Можете, кстати, проверить, но на самом деле черемуха, она уже простила.
Okay.
Number 27.
Number 27 is full of what in English we call oxymorons, paradoxes, things which shouldn't be combined but are. And the Mandelstam has a lot of these. The whole first poem begins with a черное солнце, a black sun. So this poem has a lot of them. But
Сестры, тяжесть и нежность – одинаковы ваши приметы. Медуницы и осы тяжелую розу сосут. Человек умирает, песок остывает согретый, и вчерашнее солнце на черных носилках несут. Ах, тяжелые соты и нежные сети! Легче камень поднять, чем имя твое повторить. У меня остается одна забота на свете, золотая забота, как времени бремя избыть. Словно темную воду я пью помутившийся воздух. Время вспахано плугом, и роза землею была. В медленном водовороте тяжелые и нежные розы, розы тяжесть и нежность в двойные венки заплела.
Heaviness and gentleness, two sisters and one sameness. The wasps and white-tailed bees both drink a heavy rose. A man is dead, the heat inside the sand is fading. The son of yesterday is born on a black hearse. Oh, the honeycomb that's heavy, nets that are gentle. It's easier to lift a stone than say your name. My sole remaining care upon this earth is golden. How do I escape from the burden of time? I drink the turbid air as if it is dark water. Time's tilled up by the plough, and once this rose was earth. The heavy, gentle roses swirl in a slow vortex. Heaviness, gentleness, twined in a double wreath. Now, those of you who are following the Russian will see that I do occasionally take some liberties with the translation in order to fit the meter, so do not, I'm sure there could be one or two comments, but I think I've tried to preserve the...
No, Tom, obviously translating is not just, changing one language to another. It's also bringing the poetry into the British culture, the English culture. And it's also about bringing the poetry into the English poetic tradition and culture. So you are not obliged to repeat word by word and do very simple type of translation. I think that, this feeling of being in love, which is «Ах, тяжелые соты и нежные сети, nets that are gentle, легче камень поднять, чем имя твое повторить». This is, a teenager deeply in romantic love. And I believe it's very good in English. It's easier to lift a stone than say your name. That's fantastic.
And there's also a bit of a pun there because Stone was the first name of his first collection, so possibly he's playing with that, the fact that... and of course, in this collection, the sun is usually a reference to Pushkin, who he adores and worships so much that he doesn't ever name him, but the «Вчерашнее солнце на черных носилках несут» is probably a reference to Pushkin. Do you think we need to throw it open, or should we talk a bit more?
I'm very happy to throw the floor open. And if you have any preferences, or if you want us to read any of the poems and then comment, Tom, I believe, is ready, and this is a very rare opportunity to have him read his translation and comment.
Yeah, we're the band that does request. Let me say about number 10. It's so let me just wind back a little. Tristia was published in 1922 in Berlin without Mandelstam's permission. His friend Mikhail Kuzmin, the poet, went up. Mandelstam gave him and said, "This is going to be a collection of poems." Kuzmin was in Berlin. He went to a publisher. He showed the publisher these poems. Publisher said, "We'll publish it." And Kuzmin, without asking for Mandelstam's permission, it was published in Berlin, which was a little exceeding his authority, but it was probably a good thing. A few more years with censorship in Russia, it would have been difficult to get it published. But the result is that it was published a bit in a jumbled order. There's a collection of love poems in which the final parting love poem happens in the middle, for example. And there were also poems that Mandelstam composed in that era, which he hadn't given to Kuzmin, and which weren't published, and which were only published much later. And a couple of those I included in this collection because I thought they shouldn't be left out. And one of these is this rather enigmatic poem, number 10.
Madrigal. Дочь Андроника Комнена, византийской славы дочь, помоги мне в эту ночь солнце выручить из плена. Помоги мне пышность тлена стройной песнью превозмочь. Дочь Андроника Комнена, византийской славы дочь.
Madrigal. Andronicus Comnene's daughter, daughter of Byzantine fame, help me this night to unfetter and release the captive son. Help me with my measured song to subdue this rotten grandeur. Andronicus Comnene's daughter, daughter of Byzantine fame.
You know, Tom, if I was, if that was my profession, or if I was teaching Mandelstam in a university, I would ask probably my students to think about the sun, образ солнца, the sun, colors of the sun, and what is happening with the sun in Mandelstam's poems in Tristia. And when we can say that in certain aspect he refers to the sun as to Pushkin, where does it go to Pushkin and where it is a symbol? Because there is another poem.
It's more than just Pushkin, it's many things, yeah.
Yes, there is another poem about a black sun rising over Jerusalem.
Yeah.
You know, it creates a very interesting sequence of poetic references, and I believe it would be very interesting. But I'm not into teaching Mandelstam.
Interpretation of songs.
What is it?
Your interpretation of various songs that we see in this poetry.
There's many different suns. There's a sun which is a reference to, in the first poem, it's a black sun, which is Phaedra, and that may be a reference to the sun god, the death of the sun god, and I don't know, he's playing this image of the black sun continues throughout the collection, and it seems to be the sort of, he seems to be saying we are living in the era of the black sun, where the light is blotted out, where the sun, you know, where there's this radical change, revolution, war, upheaval, paradox, that seems to be a kind of general theme of the collection. And I think he possibly got that first from Phaedra.
There is also one very interesting thing in Tristia that I noticed when I was preparing to this meeting, to this event. Mandelstam is a fantastic master of creating the first line. Just the first line. You know, he goes, you read his first line of a poem, and then you don't need the rest of it because it's already enough. Я изучил науку расставания. I mean, that is it. That is the poem.
That's what the exile has to do. The person who leaves his country has to изучить науку расставания. В Петербурге мы сойдемся снова.
В Петербурге мы сойдемся снова. Fantastic.
I'm actually going to change a word in this because it was pointed out to me that he's learned the art of separation from these women weeping, and I think "by" was not the right choice of word there. So I'm going to. So this is This is Ovid by the Black Sea, who is remembering Rome and his girlfriends in Rome, and it's also Mandelstam, I think, after a night with a girlfriend, projecting onto Ovid. But then, of course, it also becomes about the whole loss of the ancient Greek world. So it's about, you know, three different stories superimposed on each other in this poem.
Я изучил науку расставания в простоволосых жалобах ночных. Жуют валы, и длится ожидание, последний час вигилий городских. И чту обряд той петушиной ночи, когда, подняв дорожной скорби груз, глядели вдаль заплаканные очи, и женский плач мешался с пением муз. Кто может знать, при слове расставания, какая нам разлука предстоит? Что нам сулит петушье восклицание, когда огонь в Акрополе горит? И на заре какой-то новой жизни, когда в сенях лениво вол жует, зачем петух, глашатай новой жизни, на городской стене крылами бьет? И я люблю обыкновенье пряжи. Снует челнок, веретено жужжит. Смотри, навстречу, словно пух лебяжий, уже босая Делия летит. О нашей жизни скудная основа, куда как беден радости язык. Все было встарь, все повторится снова, и сладок нам лишь узнаванье миг. Да будет так. Прозрачная фигурка на чистом блюде глиняном лежит, как беличья распластанная шкурка, склонясь над воском, девушка глядит. Не нам гадать о греческом Эребе. Для женщин воск, что для мужчины медь. Нам только в битвах выпадает жребий, а им дано, гадая, умереть.
Tristia, I have learnt the art of separation, from weeping in the night, long hair let down. The oxen chew, and expectation lengthens, one final hour of vigil in the town. I venerate the cockerel's night chorus, the traveller's sorrow added to his load, as women's sobs blend with the muses singing, and stricken eyes gaze at the distant road. Who knows, hearing the word separation, what brief or final parting it foretells, the meaning of the cockerel's proclamation as fires are burning in the citadel, and in the dawn of a new life beginning, the ox is chewing idly in his stall. So why is the cockerel, new life's herald, thrashing his wings upon the city wall? I love to see the yarn's incessant habit. The shuttle skims across, the spindle hums. Look how Delia flies to meet us barefoot, swift and graceful as the down of swans. Oh, how the fabric of our life is meagre, the language of joy pitifully slight. All's happened once, all will be repeated. One glint of recognition holds delight. So be it then, a small translucent figure lies in a clear earthenware dish. A girl, like a stretched pelt of squirrel, inclines over the wax and scans her wish. We must not surmise about the will of Hades. As bronze for men, wax is women's augury. Our fate is cast upon the field of battle. Their lot in telling fortunes is to die.
Let's do another one. And then probably, if you have questions, don't hesitate, please.
Yeah, please. There's a question here.
Mm-hmm. Would Mandelstam have read classical poetry in Latin or Greek, or would you have read it in translation in Russian?
Both, I think, is a good question. He went to the Tenishef school in St. Petersburg, which was a very serious school where you got a good classical education before the revolution. He was there a few years ahead of Nabokov, who also went to that school. I think they may have had some of the same teachers. So he definitely learned his classics, although he wasn't a classical scholar. He was a poet, but yeah, he would have learned.
I believe that he read Ovid in Greek, in Latin, and in Russian also. And also, there is another very interesting thing, the influence of Tristia on Josif Brodsky. It's another topic to deliberate with the students.
First of all, I want to say that publishing the translation 101 years later than the original is some shadow of Mandelstam's fate. For example, he decided to come to Armenia exactly in 100 years after Pushkin, but in fact he came 101 years later. And the question is, nowadays poetry is translated to English usually without observing metric and rhyme. I wanted to ask if your heroic decision to keep it was changing from late 80s till now.
Thank you, Anahit, for the question. And I know that you're a Mandelstam scholar, so it's great that you're here. No, it was from the beginning. Mandelstam said basically, I alone in Russia work from the voice. He used to walk around the room composing poems, not on paper, but reciting them in his head. And everyone who was there was this wonderful cafe in St. Petersburg called the Stray Dog Cafe, which was the sort of, it was the poetry club, it was the jazz club, it was the place to be, it was where all the strange and beautiful people were. And he made a sensation there reading his poems in this kind of incantatory way, as though he was struck by a spell. So it seemed to me that if you were going to translate Tristia, you had to try and preserve the meter. And there's all this variety of different meters. So that was from the beginning. That was the decision. And maybe if I hadn't tried to do that, I would have done it in 4 years and not 34.
Now, if I may say a couple of words, just wrapping up, as you don't have any more questions, I mean.
Or you do?
Yes, please, Nina.
Very short question. Every time I reread this Russian version of it, I start wondering why some lines are missing. Is it by that he never actually wrote them, or was planning to write it later, or is this sort of omission done on purpose? Do you know? Because a couple of the most famous poems actually in this collection, they miss a few lines.
It's a great question, but I mean, Pushkin did the same. I think sometimes he just decided he didn't like that line, but he liked the poem, and he wasn't going to write a new one, and he would just leave it blank. I think that's the explanation. Maybe Anahit has a view on this?
Не все тексты сохранились полностью, потому что он уничтожал черновики. В ряде случаев он целенаправленно их уничтожал, в ряде случаев это произошло в результате арестов, простите, я на русском. И некоторые тексты сохранились чудом, не полностью.
Right. That's more so.
No, this one was.
But this is more about the later poems than the earlier ones.
Yes, but the late part of his life, he usually writing the poem was cropping the first verse. Often we can't exactly understand what about is the poem because the cry was in that first verse he put out.
Okay. Yes.
Nadezhda Mandelstam mentions on the very same subject that his friends, the closer circle, you all know, memorized the poems just to be preserved,
right.
Because, as you have correctly mentioned, many were destroyed deliberately. Now, do any scholars know whether these people contributed to the collection of poems that existed on paper or not?
I really don't know, because we're talking about the Voronezh poems, mainly the later poems, so this is beyond my scope. I think it's a bit easier with these poems because they were published. Certainly there are certain different versions. Tigran has already mentioned that he thinks that the text I was using on one poem is not the final one, but we're just talking about a few words here and there, but in the later poems, yeah, for sure, then it's a real struggle to know what is the, is there a true version of those later poems, and I don't really know. I don't know again whether you have a view, but.
Any other questions? Yes, please go ahead.
When I was reading through this book, I was particularly drawn to poem number 23 and thinking about the revolutionary era. And I was just wondering if you could expand on Mandelstam's perspectives or attitudes towards the Bolsheviks. And how he's expressing that in his poem.
Yeah, so thank you, Maya. Number 23, Sumyaki Svobody, is the most where he tries to be positive about the revolution, but it's very ambiguous. Summerki svobody, freedom's twilight. I mean, Summerki can also be possible. Could you use Summerki about the dawn as well, or just about the twilight?
No, it's twilight.
It's definitely
it's
twilight.
not the dawn.
But,
no.
But for sure, this poem is interesting because he's kind of trying to honor the Vozhd at one point, Narodny Vozhd. So he's trying to, Mandelstam wasn't just a nostalgist for the old age. He saw some value in modernity as well. So he's putting on a brave face on this and saying we must face the future, but it is deeply ambiguous. I don't know if you wanted to read the poem, but should we read it?
Yeah, we'll do that, but just a couple of sentences. Can you imagine the Russian Revolution, 1917? The whole world collapses around these people. They don't know, they know one thing for sure, that they will not have the life that they used to have a couple of months ago. They don't know what's going to be in the future. There was a certain rule which isn't there anymore. So it's a matter, and it's a very important topic in Russian poetry in particular of that years. And each poem was trying to resolve this problem for himself or herself separately. It's very personal, and it is very personal for Mandelstam. Now, Сумерки свободы. And just to say that this phrase, Сумерки свободы, became a very well-known and a very popular phrase in the late Soviet culture of dissidents, of Soviet dissidents. Прославим, братья, сумерки свободы, великий сумеречный год. В кипящие ночные воды опущен грузный лес тенет. Восходишь ты в глухие годы, о солнце, судья, народ. Прославим роковое бремя, которое в слезах народный вождь берет. Прославим власти сумрачное бремя, ее невыносимый гнет. В ком сердце есть, тот должен слышать время, как твой корабль ко дну идет. Мы в легионы боевые связали ласточек, и вот не видно солнца. Вся стихия щебечет, движется, живет. Сквозь сети, сумерки густые, не видно солнца, и земля плывет. Ну что ж, попробуем. Огромный, неуклюжий, скрипучий поворот руля. Земля плывет. Мужайтесь, мужи, как плугом океан деля. Мы будем помнить и в литейской стуже, что 10 небес нам стоила земля.
Freedom's twilight. My brothers, let us honor freedom's twilight. In the majestic year the sun goes down. In the bubbling nocturnal waters, see a dense forest of nets descend. O sun, you are judge and people rising in desolate years without end. Let us honor the momentous burden the leader of the people tearfully owns. Let us honor power's twilight burden, its weight too heavy to be borne. He who has a heart must now be hearing how time's ship is sinking down. We've bound together armies of swallows in battle legions. Now look out. The sun is dark. The universe is alive and chattering and whirls about. Through the twilight's densest webbing, the sun is dark, the earth's afloat. Let's give the helm just one more jarring, ungainly turn. With all our worth, the earth's afloat. My men be daring. Our plough cuts through the ocean, sailing forth. Even in the frost of Lethe we'll be hearing how winning 10 heavens cost us the earth.
Personal question. We know each other for more than 3 years. And am I right, assuming that your first passion in Russian literature was Pasternak rather than Mandelstam?
No. My Pasternak came later. No.
In this case, it's even better because I think the same way. You maybe remember Nadezhda Mandelstam in her memoirs described the words of their common friend Anna Akhmatova that some like tea, some like coffee, some like Keslam, some like dogs, some like Armenia, some like Georgia. And she mentioned Pasternak saying Boris Leonidovich prefers Georgia. We, together with Osip Mandelstam, always loved Armenia. So why Mandelstam, not Pasternak?
Well, I love, there are four poets of that age who I love. Mandelstam, the one I read most deeply, but also Akhmatova, Pasternak, and Tsvetaeva, I think, who was also a great poet, who I probably know the least. I think poets are people too. They like to play games. Mandelstam definitely loved Armenia, but he also spent probably more time in Georgia. He spent time in Georgia in 1920 and again in 1921. We were just in Batumi, and he was actually several months in Batumi. But maybe it was quite a difficult time of change and turbulence and poverty. So there are very few poems about Georgia. There's also there's very good prose about Georgia, but he certainly befriended the Georgian poets at the time. Armenia, for sure. He had this deep longing to come to Armenia, and when as a member of the Writers' Union, he asked and asked again for permission to come to Armenia, and finally it was given. As he said, he came in, was it 1930 or 1931?
1930 or 1931?
When did he?
I thought 1930.
1940. From 1940
До 31 от рождения века я...
Okay. Anyway, he came, and obviously Armenia was incredibly important for him because he'd had this writer's block for 5 years. He hadn't written a word. And in Armenia, he started to write verse again. Armenia reinvigorated his inspiration, and some of his greatest work is both the Armenia poems and also the incredible, his best prose work, Puteshествие в Armenia, which is also a kind of homage to Pushkin. So yeah, absolutely, Armenia was incredibly important to him, and I think the feeling is, I'm sitting with Armenians. I think the feeling, I guess, I get the impression the feeling is mutual. Armenia was important for Mandelstam, and Mandelstam is important for Armenians, and as a whole, many Russian-speaking Armenians, as it were, particularly rediscovered their country through Mandelstam. Yeah,
absolutely. It's very mutual, and Armenians of my generation, they were discovering and rediscovering Armenia through Mandelstam's poetry and through Mandelstam's views.
So maybe that's a good place to stop.
Yes, but...
We're not going anywhere.
Yes, but I want to abuse now a little bit my position and say, it's wrapping up this event, I have to say that Tom de Waal has undertaken a very, very difficult task. It was a very difficult challenge, which took him 34 years, a whole life, a lifetime. And Tom, it's a good book. It's a good translation. I cordially congratulate you with it.
Thank you.
It's a success indeed.